Hey everyone, thank you for joining us. We have another installment of our Creative Forces. Today I'm really lucky to be joined with a full camera team that will show you a lot of images from their behind the scenes and the trailer of the a project that you can watch now on Netflix. It's called Street Food Asian. Oh, I'm sorry, is
Street
that
Food
right?
Latin America.
Latin America. That was
Street Food
the
Asia was season one. Street Food Latin America is season two. Streaming now.
Thank you. You can watch both of them now, so you definitely should. So thank you guys for joining us. How's everybody doing today?
Well, thank you.
Good, good.
Awesome. Let me give the audience a little bit more of your background, and then we'll dive into how you met each other, what type of project this is, and we'll kind of dive into your approach as creatively as well as collaboratively. And I think a lot of our listeners can gain a lot of knowledge from that. Um, this project specifically is shot really beautifully, and it's a travel job as well. So I think it's really interesting to hear the logistical choices as well as the creative choices. So we'll kind of talk all about that as well as collaboratively, how they worked together as a team. So first, let me introduce you to Alex. Alexander D. Paul is a director of photography. He's worked on numerous popular television shows and movies. Most recently, Alex has served as the DP for Apple TV's Home, as well as Netflix highly acclaimed Street Food Asia, which has earned him a James Beard Award nomination for technical excellence. He's originally from New London, Connecticut, and then graduated from Emerson College with a bachelor's degree in media studies. Then he moved to Los Angeles, where he began working as a local 600 camera assistant. He's worked under the guidance of many award-winning cinematographers, including David Stump, Will Basanta, and Michael Goy. So thank you, Alex, for joining us. We're looking forward to hearing more about you and your approach. Also with me today is Anthony Hart. Anthony is an IATSE Local 600 camera assistant based in Los Angeles, California. He came up through the camera department in New Orleans, Louisiana, and moved to LA 4 years ago to pursue more travel work. He's worked as the first AC on Street Food Asia and Street Food Latin America, with a personal emphasis on wildlife cinematography and conservation. Very interesting, Anthony. We'll hear more about that and from you. And last but not least, I have Rachael Doughty with us as well. She's originally from Cleveland. She moved to LA to work at Panavision Hollywood and AC'd on the West Coast for 2 years before moving to New York, which is where she's coming from today. Once on the East Coast, Rachael joined the union and worked mostly on studio TV shows. Over the years, she's transitioned into working on more travel shows, such as Netflix Street Food, and she's also working on one currently that we'll hear a little bit about how they're navigating the current times. She currently aspires to do more camera operating and photography. So thank you, Rachael, and thank you all of you for joining us. This is actually the first time we've had a full camera team on with us, so I'm looking forward to hearing from different perspectives on, again, working approaches both creatively and technically. So really cool. So why don't we get started? Yeah, absolutely. One question I know everybody would be curious about before we take a look at the trailer of the piece that we'll be looking at today is, Alex, why don't you tell us a little bit about how you got into being, a DP? Because I know you also have a lot of first assistant work. So kind of just take us a little bit through what that's like for you.
Sure. Well, I started in 2008, really. I had graduated from Emerson College and moved out to Los Angeles with an internship at Partisan Entertainment. And I was PAing, and over the sort of course of 2008, I had made a lot of contacts, one of whom was a woman named Emily Goodwin, who really is responsible for giving me my first sort of big job. I had met her on a really indie feature. I don't even remember what it was. I was there for one day. I was doing it for free. She was the film loader, and she showed me how to load a movie cam compact mag, and said, I said, if you need anyone for the future, like a camera PA, please let me know. And she said, well, I work on a show called My Name is Earl, and we might need a camera PA in about 2 months. And I called her like 2 months later to the day, and she basically helped me get my foot in the door there. From there, I worked as a loader, worked as a utility. I started seconding. I worked on Raising Hope as a loader. I went to American Horror Story as a loader, and then was a second. And then in 2014, I got a call to join the crew for the first season of Chef's Table, which is on Netflix and by the same creators as Street Food. And that was with the DP Will Basanta. And I pulled focus for them for a long time. And when the opportunity came up with Street Food, sort of a sister show of Chef's Table, they offered me the position of DP, and so I was able to kind of completely make that transition. And that was in 2018.
Okay, that's amazing. I know we'll have more questions about that, but thank you for sharing.
Of
Why don't
course.
you tell us, and how did you meet these two collaborators that are joining
Well,
us?
Tony, I actually had met. So in 2000, I mean, I gave you a very linear sort of explanation of how my career has been, but just like I think most careers, there's been a lot of like forward and back and bouncing back and forth between
Right.
positions as you sort of transition into sort of becoming a department head. I met Tony on a show called Adam Ruins Everything, and I was actually the B camera second on that, and that was in 2017. I had gotten offered that show, and I had been on the road a really long time and wanted to take a step back and be in Los Angeles for a little bit. And Tony, you were day playing on that, right?
Yeah, yeah, I was just day playing.
So I had met Tony there, and of course he's just like a super great guy, great camera assistant, very good person. And at the end of 2017, Boardwalk, which produces Chef's Table and Street Food, uh, they had a project that they basically, I got a call and they're like, hey, we need someone to go to Egypt to shoot something, and we need you to put a crew together in like 15 minutes. And for visa reasons and all of these other logistics. And so I started calling everybody I knew to see if I could get, and I only could get one camera assistant to come with me. And Tony was, I had like met him 3 days before, and he was literally the first person to say yes. And so away we went. But I really knew Tony was going to be someone I would work with for a long time, because on the first day of shooting in Egypt, I broke the camera, and we had so many more days of shooting left, and it was such a huge opportunity to me that it was like, there's no way we can't shoot, like, come hell or high water, we're figuring this out. And
Hmm.
so Tony and I and a few people basically went on a you know around
Traveling
10:30 at
day.
night, just banging on doors of closed hardware stores in the middle of Cairo, trying to find soldering equipment. And then through the night, while Tony soldered the camera back together, I dabbed his forehead like an assistant and held like a flashlight, and he fixed it and he saved the shoot. And so I sort of that's how I met Tony,
That's
and
amazing.
that's how we became part of this team. And then during the process of trying to crew up for Street Food, I had originally actually asked another assistant who's now operating, Rebecca Bassaure, if she was available, and she wasn't. But she really highly recommended Rachel. And I had met Rachel once or twice when she was working at Panavision, but didn't really know her. But Becca had such a high recommendation that I gave her a call. And I think Rachel, we spoke on the phone, and I think that was it. And then the
Mhm.
rest is recent history.
Yeah, I think it's so interesting too, because as we'll learn with this session with you guys, is, this project is so interesting because you had to travel the world together, right, with equipment, so
Yeah.
um, and have, a creative, project at the end of it. So it's so interesting to hear about what that type of working relationship is like, and obviously it being different when you have to travel, and all the logistics and stress that you might be under versus like a stage job, something totally different.
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing that we have to consider frequently is just we have sort of two footprints we have to think about, which is the footprint of the gear as it travels, and then the footprint of the deer when we're actually in the field shooting. And they're two very different things.
Right, and this project, those of you that have seen it, it's so cinematic, it's so high production value, and also feels very authentic and docu style. So that's definitely what I want to talk to you about, and then also for the camera crew, what type of technical considerations you had to do in order to help that approach. Before we get into that, why don't we watch the trailer from season 2, and so we can get all of our audience members taking a look at those images. So we can go ahead and cue that up, and we'll come back and ask more questions.
Street food is in our DNA. It's fried, it's cheesy, it's potatoey. It's the type of food that you want to just keep eating and eating and eating.
En donde se baila, se brinda por la vida, se toma mezcal. ¡Ay, delicia!
Cuando se toma ese caldo, se vuelve muy inquieto, entonces por eso se llama rompecolchón.
Vivo junto a mi madre. No podría tener una pareja porque todo el tiempo apesto a pescado.
Cada puesto ha tenido como una historia de vida por detrás.
Ya no tenía dinero, mi cocina no tenía gas. Yo tenía como ese temor por mi hijo.
El asado era cosa de hombres, pero me considero una persona rebelde.
No me dejo manejar. Es un mundo que tienes que luchar. Me volví bien macha.
¡Vamos! ¿Qué ha pasado? ¡Está pasando!
A comida de rua dá identidade, que é diverso, é colorido e, sobretudo, cheio de vida.
Beautiful. Really nice job, Alex and Rachel and Tony. Thank you for being here with us. And I really love the show. I've watched both seasons. I think, cinematography and production value, it's really beautiful, but I also personally love hearing, all these really honest stories from the people that, that are featured. I think that's one of the most interesting things.
Yeah. And it should also be noted, so the way that these shows are shot, they have two teams. And so Tony, Rachel, and I filmed Colombia, Brazil, and Mexico. Mm-hmm. And then I should mention Matt Chavez, who is the other DP, who's extremely talented and, also is an integral part of sort of the development of the look and style. And he also did season 1 as well.
Oh, okay, great.
Yeah.
Actually, why don't we start there? Because I think that's what's one of the big things that's interesting about, like I said, this project is, your approach, in terms of the style and creatively, and then we can kind of dive into, how you actually achieve that.
Well, I mean, the look of the show is something where you kind of have to walk this line where you're kind of doing a lot of verite, but you also are doing a lot of scene work where you have to light it. There's an understood expectation coming off of that sort of chef's table world of doing a docuseries that has sort of a premiere photographic look. In terms of how we accomplish that, it's a mix of quantity and quality. I mean, we go into these locations and it almost feels like from the minute you wake up to the minute you go to bed, you're shooting. And I think in that process, you get better and better at getting as much content that looks really good versus just sort of pointing the camera and hope they can figure it out in post. There are certain aesthetic qualities that as a team we activate the second we get into the field. For example, we shoot with Zeiss Mark III primes, and we always shoot wide open. And that's sort of like a key part of the look. We use a LUT, that's a proprietary LUT from Apache, where we do our color correcting. So we have a look that has been developed that is unique to street food, but kind of is also an extension branched off of the chef's table look.
Right.
I think the biggest difference between season 1 and season 2, though, for example, that we learned was, chef's table leans very heavily on slow motion as an effect, and we realized going into season 2 of street food that because it's a much shorter timeline, we needed to shoot way less slow motion. But I think the biggest thing is, it's a look that leans heavily on a very shallow depth of field. It's a look that leans very heavily on like really bright popping colors, and it's a look that leans heavily on more traditionally narrative visual tools. Using sliders and dollies and Steadicam for some things, and mixing that in with verite on an easy rig,
Right.
as opposed to something that's a little bit more straight documentary, where it would just be kind of following around, sort of, handheld shoulder verite kind of work. So it's a real mix. I often describe it as feeling like shooting an indie feature film, only you just have no script. But we do talk about the situations. The director and I, Daniel Milder, spent a lot of time on this last season talking about every location we were going into, and talking about how we wanted to film it. And we would actually create a shot list, even though we didn't have a script. We would create a shot list that, more often than not, kind of became a sort of backbone that we would work with, and not something that we would stick to literally, but it would
Right.
provide us with an intuition on how we would shoot a scene once we were in there and actually saw how our subject was going to be interacting with things.
That sounds really smart, because you basically have a foundation, kind of like a groundwork laid, and then it changes based on the subject and the location.
Exactly.
So since this was a travel job too, and we have this team here, for those watching that maybe haven't done travel jobs, is it something where you did the camera prep and had choices of camera, locally, and everyone prepped in LA, and then you traveled, or maybe talk through what that's like in terms of your team?
I'll pass it off to maybe Tony and Rachel to talk about that, if you guys wouldn't mind.
Yeah. I can start, Rachel, and then you can follow up.
Sure.
That's good. So we do prep everything in Los Angeles, and that means that the biggest issue was that you have to plan for 2 months in advance. You have to plan for 3 different locations for various amounts of weather conditions, and to kind of have your weather gear under, in order, and then also having enough backups for everything, because on a studio set you have maybe 1, maybe 2 backups, and you can keep them on the truck or whatever. Here we're carrying most of the stuff, and so it's limited down to about like 12 of our cases plus additional other cases for lighting and grip and all that. And so you're trying to fit everything into a very small space that will travel lightly, that also you won't get screwed. And in the end, so we do a lot of tests at the beginning, making sure that and having first season was really helpful too, to know what we need to have for the second season, and things also that we don't need. But yeah, I think that's the biggest difficulty is planning ahead that far, because a lot of these locations, like Oaxaca, Mexico, we were hours away from, like, flying hours away from Mexico City, and so if something went wrong, we'd have to have something flown in from another rental house if they had it. A lot of times these places don't have either what you're looking for or something similar to what you're looking for. So yeah, planning for that, carrying even like things like fuses for monitors and stuff like that, just everything you could possibly think of. And Rachel, if you want to follow.
Yeah. So Alex was saying earlier how we had 2 kind of packs. So the one was for flying and one was for actually working on the ground with. And that's something we worked out a lot at prep. So I think we did a really good job at getting our pack super tight. We had maybe like 4 large cases that we separated: A, B, cam, lenses, filters, and like all the expensive parts were in these big 16, 15 Pelicans, and that was like super compact and tight. And Moby had its own case, and then we just like shoved everything else in a body bag, and it was just like this really good flying unit. And then when we landed, we had a prep day in each country. So it was to take apart all that really tight, packed air flying stuff and rebuild it in each country and get it ready for us to work out a back. Oh, there's a photo. So that was 8 cam.
Oh,
whoa. Those are 8 cam case. So you can see there's like no room for anything else. It just was very tight. And yeah, so we would redo that in every single country. We would repack it like that, and we'd unpack it every place we got we'd use backpacks. So we were very light on our feet, and yeah, this was the most time-consuming thing of prep, was just making everything ready for flight and redoing that in every country we were in. So that was the most important part for prep.
I have to say, these guys are so good at keeping everything organized. And when I was like a first AC, I thought I was really good at pulling focus, but organization, like if you looked at how I had packed things and showed videos, I'd be so, like these guys are above and beyond when it comes to keeping all of this stuff organized. And it's crazy because we're working at a really fast, a furiously fast pace, and yet they manage to maintain the equipment, keep track of it, make sure that if we do have any L&D, that what we need to replace is taken care of. I'm in very good hands with these guys. They're a great team.
Yeah, I think that's amazing, because I've done jobs where I'm not even traveling and we're super organized in the beginning, and then by the end of it, we're not. So just to dive a little more specifically for the audience, Tony and Rachel, what are the types of things that you've learned, over time that maybe could help some of our audience if they're having to be like lean and mean on work?
Might start, or Rachel?
You can go.
Okay. Talking about the preps that we have in LA, about having to plan for 2 months in advance. A big one that I realized maybe I wasn't doing enough testing. So literally you think of any situation you could be in and do that. So at the rental house, we did most of our tests inside. And then once we got in the field, we realized, we shoot almost exclusively wide open. Mm-hmm. But there was a situation where either we didn't have time to put glass in or like filter in, or wanted it to be stopped down to like a 16 or something. And when we pointed at the sky, it had a really bad flare. You could see the aberration in it. So, and once we looked down in the glass, you could actually see the spot. And that's something that we would have caught if we would have gone outside and pointed up at the sun, turned it to 16, and tried all those variables out. So I would suggest that, just like think ahead on and put yourself into the situation of what you might be shooting, no matter what it is, and try to replicate that in your prep.
Yeah.
Sorry, Rachel, go ahead.
I was just going along with what Tony was saying about just using every minute of prep and just testing everything, but also just getting your organization down, because you aren't going to have time. It's not going to be like, oh, we'll just organize the truck later on set one day, the loader will go do it. It's like you need to really use every second of that prep to be as idiot-proof as possible, because you're not going to have the mental capacity to think about it when we're running around with backpacks and you can't get organized later. So yeah, that's what I learned.
Yeah.
And I was going to say also, being the first AC on a job like street food, it's a really interesting position to be in, because you're not just pulling focus. I mean, one of the things that Tony is really great at, while I'm filming and I have the camera on an easy rig and I'm sort of like trying to really focus on what I'm doing and also look and see what is happening off screen and try to anticipate things, it's sometimes easy to miss like your reflection or a flickering light. And Tony is really great at being the last line of defense against those kinds of things and calling it out. And, as a team, we've really established a rapport where we go into a location and we really are able to seamlessly just get in and get out. I mean, and that speaks to just how organized these guys are with the equipment. I've never thought in my head like, oh, what's taking so long for this? Ever. Never once. It's insane. You would think, but
right. Yeah, I know you mentioned earlier on a different call that, the team really were anticipatory as well. So, maybe you could talk about that, Alex, as well, because I feel a lot of times that's how a camera assistant could kind of improve, or what they could learn.
Yeah.
And you mentioned it as like a key thing that they were able to do for you. So maybe talk about that for a minute.
Well, I mean, with our unit, we're trying to get as much quality content as possible. And in a lot of cases, I mean, there's sort of a standing order where if I'm talking with the director and Tony or Rachel just sees something and the camera's on the tripod, just point the camera and get it. I mean, we need as much as we can for them to be able to cut this down into a 30-minute narrative. So one of the things that we do is we actually split one of the assistants off to shoot second unit and a lot of B-roll. And when you guys watch our episodes, a lot of the footage is Tony and Rachel's as well. And again, it's tough because we're working with a small team. And I do think one of the secrets to the success of the photography of the show is that we have a first and a second AC who really support each other and then help me while we're shooting. But they also will go off and shoot footage while at the same time. And that is an integral part of how we get as much content as we do. So yeah, that's it's a very important aspect.
I could add more. Well, working on that first that show in Egypt that that Alex and I did, it was that was our first time really working together in that environment and that that dynamic.
With us crouched over a desk with pyramids and a window behind us, sweating bullets and praying to God that the camera was going to turn on.
Yeah, well,
that'll really bond people for sure.
I remember the director walked in and was like, "Hey, how you guys doing?" And we're like, "Not now." And he's like, "Okay."
Yeah, that was and that was something that I just kind of used intuition. I'd never built a camera or anything. It's not like I had that prior knowledge, but I've welded little wires to connectors and stuff like that.
And you sure acted like it.
I know. Well, I mean, I've done minimal stuff like that, but I was actually going to touch on the sense that a lot of these things I didn't know about, like how much filtration to put in just by eye, and so that relationship between me and Alex was really helpful going into street food, because he would start relieving some of the duties onto me and saying, what do you think this needs right now? And instead of just telling me, oh, put in an ND 1.2 or put it in a 6 or whatever the situation is, he'd start asking me to think logically and think like, oh, it's about that sunny. Last time it was this sunny, we needed this. And so that anticipation nowadays, a lot of times he doesn't even have to say it. It's just, I look at the sky and I think before he even comes up to the camera, because he is holding, what is it, 50 pounds probably, plus the Vario, which is
the
easy rig. And so it's a lot of weight, and he carries it like a beast all day long. And so you want to make it as easy as possible for him. And so by having the lens and the filtration preloaded, so he doesn't have to be holding it as long, is really important. So I think that anticipation for what he will need and what will make the shot go quicker is really important too.
Yeah, and speaking to just sort of how this team works together, again, because we're not in a studio setting and we're constantly coming up against variables that, despite our best efforts, we're not able to anticipate. The lines between positions can get really blurred, but I do think that's part of the success, is how flexible we are about doing things. I mean, I've pulled focus on a couple of things. Rachael has shot B-roll and some second unit stuff. Tony has done the same thing. I mean, I really do feel like you could put any one of us in any of the roles, and we could pull off the series. I also have to say, like, the level of teamwork that we do, I think, is best encapsulated when one night we were backlogged on footage, and we pushed a bunch of couches together in our equipment room in the hotel, and kind of like slept in shifts while Rachael was downloading to keep her company through the night. I mean, it's a great team. That's my role here on this Skype, is to just talk about how great they are.
Also, it's really nice that you're able to trust us like that, just able to take a step back, and we are able to shoot B-roll, and I can first, and it's just refreshing, and that's how you learn, when you are able to put that on other people and give them a chance. So I appreciate that.
Well, it's not easy to get a show like this in the can, and so it does take a lot of trust, and it takes a lot of flexibility, and I think that's really what the three of us bring to the table the best.
Yeah, it really sounds like it. I think that's key for any type of job, but I would say, yeah, especially when you've got all these other elements of the travel and, being in locations you haven't been in before, the flexibility is key.
Hey, this is Jeff. Is now a good time for a question from the audience?
Yeah.
Great. We had a question come up. Did you have any airline problems or delays with shipping gear that way? And if so, how do you come back from that? Because I could imagine it could really impact the schedule.
Well, I would say, actually the gear travels with at least for our unit, the gear traveled with me, Daniel Milder, our director, and Drew Palombi, the producer, and Rachael and Tony actually wouldn't travel with the gear. We would give them a little bit of a break, since they were lugging the gear so much during the week. We never ran into any carne issues. I would say the hardest experience I ever had was actually on season 1, when we were leaving India, and their carne, which, for viewers who don't know what that is, when you leave a country and enter another country with anything that has a value over a certain amount, you have to declare it when you enter and go through a whole customs thing. And I'm not exactly entirely sure what all of the legalities of that are, but it has to, I think, do with, like, they want to make sure you're not trying to sell it in their country or something like that. And most carne experiences, you go into an office, there's an officer, they look at this list with a bunch of barcodes, and they say, show me this. And you open up a case and you go, all right, here it is. And they're like, great. And they go, show me this. And you open up another case and you go, here it is. And they go, great. And that's basically it. And they stamp a few things. On season 1, we were leaving India, and I think we got there 7 hours ahead, because Drew explicitly had said carne there is very thorough. And the guy basically went through every item on the list. And it's packed, and I didn't pack it, and so I'm like going through and looking for cables with barcodes, and it took 6 or 7 hours, and it took so long that they ended up having us nearly bypass security. We still had to go through some, and then they threw us in a cart and drove us at top speed through the airport, and we basically got to the airplane as they were closing the door. That was very stressful. Sometimes we run into weight issues, but those never seem to be the biggest problem. It takes, in terms of, like, one case weighs too much, and sometimes we'll just shift things. But I'd say that story from India was probably the worst experience I had. It was tedious. It was so tedious.
They were holding up the AA batteries. It was pretty intense.
Yeah.
Yeah, batteries is another big one. A lot of different airlines and a lot of different countries have different regulations on how many batteries, what size batteries, like what wattage and stuff like that you're actually allowed to bring. And so how much needs to be carried, they all need to be carried on your person. And so a lot of times we'll have a backpack that's heavier than our camera loading backpack, because it's full of batteries, just like stuffed to the brim. And then I was going to say one bad situation in Egypt was that because of political conflict, our president deciding on certain issues in Egypt, they held our camera for a while, and the producer then was pretty sure that it was tied to that because there was no other reason, but they held it for 24 hours, and they sat in the waiting room with it for 24 hours to make sure that nothing happened with it. So even things that are external of what you're doing, you could do everything to a T perfectly, and sometimes political issues can arise, and you might get stuck somewhere or get your items kept.
I forgot about that. That whole Egypt job basically felt like one long day separated by a couple of naps.
It sounds like those situations would be key to also have communicative and flexible producers and directors and the other people that you're working with obviously on the team.
Yeah, and I would say on street food especially, my experience has been everyone is super collaborative. Daniel and I sometimes will go out by ourselves with the camera, and he'll carry the lenses and I'll take the camera package, and we'll just work together as well to shoot things. I mean, it's I would best describe it as an all hands on deck kind of situation. Everyone really gives 110%, and I would say that is key to how we are able to get so much quality content.
Absolutely. While we're on, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to add one more thing for people traveling. A smile and a good personality goes a long way too. A lot of times I've had something that should not have gone through. They're holding me because I had one of the hard drives and it weighed way too much to put on an overhead. And you just smile and you keep being really nice, and eventually people will give in. So
well, that's how he moved. He's just good at that. So.
Yeah, Tony's just like a walk and smile.
Yeah,
right. Absolutely. Well, while we're on the gear topic, I was thinking this question would actually apply to each of you. So, going back to how you said, you had to really take those prep days into consideration, really test everything. What about in terms of, choosing your equipment? So, obviously, Alex, you'd be looking at things from a creative standpoint, but also, the types of camera movement you wanted to do, but then also for Tony and for Rachel, you kind of had to make sure that the tools that you're bringing with you in terms of your, wireless focus or your loader station, maybe you guys could talk through that a little bit about how you each had to kind of, look at what you needed, and did it change, what you could and couldn't do?
I'll start on this one if you guys don't mind. So going into season 1, I had a lot of conversations with Matt Chavez, the other DP. And one of the things that was really important to me, especially since we were actually going to be going into a lot of places that were very tight, was I wanted to make sure we had a lens set that had a lot of quality to the glass, but also was compact, light, and easy to sort of fit into one backpack. And for me, the Zeiss Mark IIIs really came up because they're very small, and sometimes there's some housing issues, but generally speaking, they seem to work pretty well. And the glass quality, we keep track of all of the lens serial numbers because they don't all match, but we've been able to really put together a good matched set for those lenses that look really great. Again, for me, from a creative and technical consideration, because on something like this, the two aren't mutually exclusive, I was really concerned about making sure that we picked equipment that would allow us to shoot in tight quarters and allow us to be able to pack into a couple of backpacks, so we could basically just hop out of a van and be ready within a minute to start shooting and be and have a very small footprint. We chose the Red Gemini on season 1 because we weren't entirely sure what kind of lighting situations we were going to get into, and that camera has a very good low light setting, which we used frequently on season 1. But going into season 2, I found myself doing a lot more lighting, and so ended up never using it. But that was the original choice for going with the Red Gemini.
Yeah, absolutely. That's definitely that makes total sense, and it's compact as well, and you could kind of build it out as so that
absolutely
that served you well. That's great.
I think so. Rachel came up through the Panavision program, if I'm correct, right?
Yeah.
And she is like top notch on knowing gear. So I don't know, Rachel, if you want to talk anything about gear, I think you're a wealth of knowledge.
Well, I didn't decide what gear we'd bring, just kind of how we'd pack it, I guess. The backpacks was Alex's idea, and I brought my f-stop bag. Tony also brought his. We managed to fit the lenses into their own backpack, batteries and filters into their own backpack, and in terms of my loading kit, I had a 1510 Pelican where it fit the computer and the shuttle drives, and it was just like a really quick packable thing you could just open up and plug in and start downloading in some of the weirdest places, like on the streets of Thailand. But yeah, I don't have much to say about selecting gear, but yeah, that was. Oh, there's my downloading station. It was just funny. Random places we would set up, and it would just downpour 30 minutes later, and it was just such a fragile station that was just kind of so exposed, but you just working on the fly, and that's kind of how it had to be. But yeah, it was a good system because I could just throw that into a Pelican very quickly. Yeah.
Yeah, I love seeing the station set up in all those different areas. I can imagine that being a little challenging.
And speaking more about the equipment that we brought with us, I think one of the things that we had really learned going from season 1 to season 2 was how to use the Movi, which we brought with us on the second season as well as the first. But on the first season, we really tried to use it as sort of a replacement for a Steadicam. And what the Movi really, at least how I was using it, was able to provide was just sort of a better, more stabilized handheld. On the second season, we really exclusively used it only exclusively used it for food beauty, where we would hang it from a Dana dolly, and then either I or Tony or someone would be controlling it with a remote system. And that was actually where it really shined, was just sort of as a 3-axis head versus something to try to emulate a Steadicam. And that was a big lesson for me going from season 1 to season 2. But I think that still bringing it and utilizing it in this way really upped our game on the Latin America season.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's interesting. Using it more like a remote head, essentially.
Exactly.
And then for my position as first AC, I'd say the monitor situation was something that I'm still perfecting, but it really pays off when you are a little bit more intentional about it, and because you're carrying it for all day long, 12 hours a day, 14 hours a day, and for the most part holding it with one hand since your other hand is focusing. And so all that weight being put on one arm for that long, it would fatigue. And a lot of times before, there was a larger battery, Sony NPF, I think, stuck to the back of that monitor. And I started buying things like a rifle sling, so it could just kind of hang at my side. Something for lenses, which was from Spider, that company. And so I actually attached a kind of a I don't know what it's called, but an attachment to it to where I could just hang it on that little holster on my side. So another problem was that the antennas used to stick out the top, and whenever I'd squat down to change the lens on the camera, the antennae were smashed up. So this kept it at my side, meant while I was walking, carrying the tripod and camera from one place to another, it's not swinging around, getting smacked all over the place. So really improvising with that and using stuff from a lot of different fields where it's not just camera gear, I think helps a lot for fine-tuning that to make it the best it can be.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's really interesting. Other resources, and I love hearing that you kind of continued to perfect it, along the way.
Yeah, still can be.
Yeah, I'm sure. Everything. Why don't we talk a little bit about the style as well? So, Alex, I know, as you mentioned, it's kind of like a film without a script. So, could we talk a little bit about how you did? You have a foundation, you have a plan, but then you get to a location and maybe you kind of have to adapt, or what did that look like? And I know you're also an extensive planner and note taker, so maybe you could share a little bit about your approach to once you got there. What did that look like?
Well, I mean, in preparing for for the shoot, I spent a lot of time with Daniel, and this was before we actually just even went out into the field. What's really important for me is I like to understand sort of the story that the director is trying to tell. And for me, I draw a lot of inspiration. I try to find artists from the different areas that we're going to be filming in, and kind of try to, get inspiration from the work of other people from those regions. I think, in a practical sense, when we're in the field, Daniel has a very keen understanding of how to construct a narrative and how to construct a story. And while I have found that, like, in the edit, how we have thought things will come together hasn't always been the case. What is really interesting is we'll like talk about a scene, and in Colombia, for example, we went to this beautiful herb market, and we wanted to film Luz Dari, our subject, going through and picking out herbs that she would use in her cooking. And so we would talk about where that scene might fit in the narrative and how it might work. And then off of that, kind of develop a mood for it and ask ourselves, well, is this better handheld? Is this better as a series of shots on sticks? Is this going to be better on the Movi? Is this going to be better with a Steadicam? And once we kind of decided what the visual vernacular of that scene was going to be, what's really great is that you can kind of superimpose any emotion onto that, so that when they take that scene into the edit, it looks completely different from the scene before it and the scene after it, because each section with each scene, we approached it with a different kind of look behind it, a different kind of emotive mentality, so that you didn't have two scenes following each other that look the same. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I think that was like a really big thing for me, at least, to be able to approach it that way. But you, of course, just like anything. So talking about that herb market, for example, we talked about, okay, how do we get her entrance? Okay, she walks into the frame. We have a wide shot. We follow her down a hallway that reveals the expanse of the space. We need a close-up of her here. We need a close-up of her there. Well, when you actually get into the space and you realize how chaotic a market can be, or when you were there on the day you scouted, there was all this space, and now there's all these new vendors there that you didn't know were going to be there. So you go, well, the backbone of this is that we have an entrance establishing, her talking to somebody where we did a shot in a reverse, and then an exit. Well, now that we know that we need those four things to really make a complete scene, we can kind of roll with the punches. And then, because we had planned that out already, as long as we get those four things, if we have more time, we can build upon that. And that's sort of the process that at least really worked for me and kind of developed out of that.
That's really interesting. I'm curious what also, just before we get on to an audience question here, what was it like? What was your collaboration like with the other DP? Were they shooting simultaneously, or that was before or after you, or just speaking from that point of view of like your foundation, what was that like?
They shoot simultaneously. Going into season one, Matt and I had talked a handful of times, and there had been, they hold between episodes conference calls where everybody from both units is all on at the same time. I think going into season two, Matt and I really have had, going off of sort of the established look, kind of went into season two knowing, what we were going to be doing. The other thing is we have a shared file system, so we upload photos and we can see what the other person is doing and kind of jump off of that.
That's smart.
Though I will say, once we're really in the thick of it, it's hard to like talk to anybody outside of your unit, because you're just working so much.
Right.
It's like you wake up, you go outside, you shoot the sunrise, you shoot, you have lunch. I think I usually take a nap, then you shoot. You go back, Rachel's downloading, Tony's making sure that nothing's broken, and then I'm talking with Daniel and Drew trying to plan the next day. And then I would spend a lot of the time doing lighting schematics, because that was something, crossing a language barrier with your crew. I realized having just a sort of written documents or visual documents of what exactly it is you're trying to achieve made things move so much faster. So then it would be like falling asleep at my desk with graph paper.
And for Rachel and I think having being pretty good at gestures is a really handy thing to have in countries where you can't speak their language, because in places like Asia, where I think Rachel knows quite a bit of Spanish, but for Asia we were both kind of lost, and so it was a lot of like trying to describe a thing with like thing this big there, and
like one keyword and
yeah,
a directional word, and
patience
that gets you a long way.
Yeah.
I think the thing that I've learned about working with teams in other countries where you're going to have a language barrier is if you can just figure out how to convey the basics of what you want and then just let them do their thing around you, because you're never going to be able to like tell them how you want it done. You just got to let them do it their way, and eventually you'll be like, oh, they did exactly what I was hoping for. I'd say in Colombia we had an excellent crew, though. We had an excellent grip and electric team that they were just phenomenal. I mean, every team was great, but they really stood out.
We also had a Steadicam there, which was our first real camera person besides us to work with us.
Yeah, that was crazy. And actually, it was interesting because these guys do so much traveling and travel work even outside of street food. Tony was able to. He knew camera assistants in Colombia and camera people in Colombia for when we needed sort of a second unit going at the same time in the same space that we were shooting. That was a crazy day.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if you guys work with anyone, make sure to get everyone's number, because
you never know when it's going to come back. Helpful. Yeah.
I think this would be a good point to take an audience question. So I think we've had a couple pop up. So
sure. Question from the YouTube chat. We'll start with how are the subjects for each episode chosen? The stories are so compelling.
There's a lot of research that goes into it ahead of time. Daniel and Tamara, the directors of the last 2 seasons, they have a team over at Boardwalk. They go out and they scout and they meet experts on the subject of food and street food in particular, and basically find, very far in advance these subjects that we end up filming. And it goes through a pretty lengthy screening process and research process before we get involved.
Yeah, that's interesting. I agree. I think the characters are so compelling, but then also, the stories that you're able to show through the B-roll and, just the supporting imagery is really beautiful.
Well, thank you. I mean, and I have to say, from the top down on these shows, everyone works really, really hard. Not just our camera department, but the producers, the directors. I mean, it's not an easy thing to make a show like this, and everyone, I get the sense, really loves trying to rise to the challenge.
Mm-hmm. That's my favorite part of like any project, but I could see this project especially even more challenge.
It's an adventure for sure.
So since you mentioned lighting schematics, I think we could also touch on that because we haven't talked about that yet. So maybe before we even get into the creative elements, was your lighting crew local, or what was the G&E department like?
Yeah, we only travel in terms of crew. We only travel myself, Tony, and Rachel, and a sound person. Mm-hmm. And then we get all of our grip and electric teams and equipment in local areas. What was the question?
No problem. I'm like, what did I ask? The question was, so you answered the local crew one, but now let's talk about, your approach creatively, because you mentioned the lighting schematics.
Oh, sure.
And you also were probably going to have to be lean, I would imagine, due to the spaces. So just curious how you approached it.
Well, I mean, everything, as always, is a real case-by-case basis. After scouting locations and getting a sense of what each space is like, the 2 things that I would go when we would do scouts that I would look at is, where's the sun going to be when we film here, and the bigger question is, do we need to light a space? For a lot of there were a lot of opportunities where we would be shooting somewhere and have verite. That's such a funny photo of me. We'd be shooting verite, and because we didn't really need the grip and electric team, we could send them ahead to a location to pre-light it. I think in some cases where we were, say, in Donna Susanna's kitchen, it didn't have a lot of natural light coming in. And so that was like an example where on the first or second day, we just pre-rigged it with a bunch of lights that we had in there. And then that just lived there. So it's always a case by case basis. What we got really good at was, like I said, having these lighting schematics that I would give to the local team and being able to really leapfrog our setup. So, we would shoot verite, and while we were shooting verite, the grip and electric department would be setting up for our interview. We'd show up for the interview, and then they would go and set up for either our next interview or start to get stuff ready for food beauty. And that system really worked well. And so that was sort of how we did it. What was a real learning curve was terminology. So we never ran into an issue where, if I asked for a 1.2 HMI, everybody has the equipment that you're looking for, but some of the local terminology is different. And so one of the things that I also learned to do was I would send the list to either the gaffer or somebody on the crew who was bilingual, and have them translate the list into sort of the local vernacular for that equipment as well. Really the real thing on this show is learning tricks to get through those language barriers.
Yeah, I was just thinking, did you do the lighting schematics, previously? Like, is that how you normally like to work, or was that also an angle because it would be something you could draw as opposed to have to do the language?
It was something that came up to really help center myself, and then became obviously like very helpful in crossing that boundary, the language barrier. Up until that point, I really hadn't done lighting schematics as or at least as officially as I had done on this. But since then, even on projects where everyone speaks the same language, I still do them. It just I realized how much of a time saver, which I think I say this now and I go, there's so many DPs out there that are probably rolling their eyes going like, yeah, duh. But it took me a while to get there. I don't know what to say.
No, I think that's a good point. I think sometimes, it's like you learn what discipline you need, and what helps what you, and like you said, sometimes you did it just for you, and then you realize, oh, they were actually beneficial for others too, so yeah.
And it was helpful to be able to look back and say, well, we were in a similar place in Colombia. How did I light that? And then you go, okay, well, this will actually really work. We can just duplicate this schematic for this location in Salvador. And so it was very helpful to also just streamline the process of preparing for things that you had already prepared for.
Yeah, absolutely.
What about?
Oh, sorry, Tony, go ahead.
I was going to say, for Rachel and I, for the lighting schematics, or at least the setup, we also took really precise notes on the distance from subject. Usually I think Rachel would probably make a diagram showing which side of the eye line we were on for the interview. And then what else did we have? Height, everything to make it kind of formulaic and how we filmed each interview. So that way there was no drastic change between each.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Also, we came back to some setups later and had to create them.
Yeah, I think the three of us have taken meticulous notes and could recreate the show from scratch.
Yeah, it sounds like you guys all have a good discipline, but also the flexibility to, modify that when necessary. Yeah. Absolutely amazing. I think we've got another question from the audience that I think would be great if we want to pop that in.
Yes, someone was asking, it's a question for Rachel, specifically about the media management and workflow, and like, did you work with a quote unquote lab for dailies, or just like where did the footage go after it left set? And
so we had a master 64 terabyte G drive and 4 Samsung shuttle drives, and so we would, the first season, after 2 episodes, we sent back one of those G drives to be like the backup. But after every episode, we would send back, it'd be about 4 terabyte shuttle drives that we would send back after each episode back to the post house, which was Andrew Bank, putting them in all Boardwalk's system and just downloading that. And yeah, it was just after every episode, those shuttle drives would get sent back, and I would keep the backup with me, the larger 64 terabyte drive with me on set.
Interesting. And I was wondering, actually, from a time standpoint, so each episode is a specific, country. So how much time were you in each area, and how much time did you have to prep and scout locations? Maybe talk us through that a little bit.
Well, in terms of going into a location and prepping and scouting, we were given 4 days per location to scout, which most of that actually would become us looking for interview locations, because we have to accommodate sort of trying to find a place with an interesting look that we can also set dress a little bit, as well as have space to light, as well as accommodate sound issues, which I think is sort of the sort of eternal journey on these shows, is finding places that are quiet enough to hold an interview. And so that for us, that's what our process was. Beforehand, I think about a month beforehand, I would go into the office and work with Daniel to prep for the show in writ large. But in the field, we'd have 4 days per episode. And each episode was a 5-day shoot.
Okay, I was wondering that. Okay, so that's pretty fast.
Yeah.
Still pretty fast. What was everyone's favorite? Oh, sorry, Tony, go ahead.
Oh, no, I just, well, Rachel talking about the loading situation reminded me that, and hopefully I'm not talking about something that you were going to ask in the future, but she is and probably will forever be far superior than I am as a loader. And I think on that Egypt show, it was just AP and I, or Alex and I. And so I was doing the first, second, and loader position. And in doing that, I was never a good loader, or never a great loader, I guess. But by having that knowledge of what it took to do that, I think was imperative in realizing, like, sometimes Rachel's going to have to disappear on set, and I can't just ask her, like, hey, can you get me that lens? Can you get me that whatever? And it gave me more compassion towards what is on her plate. And I think that's really important for a lot of people coming up through this industry, because a lot of times you can skip steps. You can, somebody, they think that you're great, whatever. I'm a much better first than I was a loader. And so in some scenarios, I could be elevated a lot faster through knowing somebody. And I think that's really important, that even if you do get that opportunity to jump ahead, that even if you don't hold the position, you should at least research it and maybe spend a day with someone who does the positions that support you in completing your day. Because a lot of times I've noticed people on like bigger sets and stuff like that, they tend to kind of expect too much from people below them, or in positions that assist them. And I think that would be, it's really helpful to know what goes into each job, to know how much to expect of that person, or when it's too much to expect of someone, and when you need to kind of pick up the slack yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. It gives you perspective, and then also as the first AC, you would need to know when, like you said, when is it going to be too much, or when are you going to need an additional person if you were able to do that. You kind of have to navigate that conversation too. But
I have to say, at the same time, Rachel somehow is able to do all of her chore or job duties. And then I turn around and she's right there. I'm like, how the heck did you get everything done?
She's actually just always behind
you. Yeah.
Yeah. The most stressful part was having to walk away from set and feeling torn between what was going on with the download and what was going on, trying to find these guys across some market. They moved on, just trying to keep track of everyone and hurt everyone.
Yeah, that's why I was curious, the amount of time you had, because obviously your workflow plays into that in terms of how quickly you had to offload things. I love that story of you guys staying up or rotating who was sleeping to offload at night.
Sponsored by John Wick, right?
Yeah, we watched. How did we watch? Just
maybe all.
Well, there were some days that I didn't. What?
I was saying, which John Wick movies did we watch that night?
The first one. We'd watch 2 and 3 on the airplane.
That's right.
Sorry, Rachel, what were you gonna say?
Well, there were some days that I didn't download at all when I was B-roll, and I would just do it all at night. And that was a similar scenario where we just hang out and order room service.
Yeah, so have to adapt to, the situation and the time that you have. That's
Yeah.
really interesting. I was gonna ask what was everyone's favorite country that you've shot in for this show.
I really loved Bogota, Colombia. I thought that. I mean, they were all great, but I don't know. I just really enjoyed that shoot in particular.
I really loved Brazil because I love dancing, and it was just like I think our gaffer had a boombox on set for Food Beauty,
Yeah,
which
yeah,
is where
yeah.
you see us all wearing Hawaiian shirts. And that was actually because the airline lost all my luggage on the way there. And so we were like 3 days away from shooting, and I was like, am I gonna have any clothes or anything to wear for the next 6 days? And so tried one of those shirts on. It became a crew uniform. But it was a lot of fun just being able to dance and be able to. The crew is very cheerful, and the environment's beautiful. It was like right on the ocean side. But really, I mean, we've done 2 seasons now, and it feels like these two are family, and really everyone on there feels like family. And I think that's a really important thing that unfortunately you don't necessarily get to choose at the beginning when you're first coming up in the industry. I had to work with people I really didn't like maybe, and didn't enjoy working with. But as time goes on, you get to meet people that you really click with, and this job seems like vacation, even though it's extremely stressful. Both of them, Rachel and Alex, are both really funny and make the day go by really quickly, and kind of release all that stress just by being so just compassionate and really great people. So work with people you like.
I would say that it's definitely stressful. There's definitely moments. I think that you have steam and it gets. I've definitely snapped at Tony like once or twice, and I'm always feel really bad about it. But we're moving at a furious pace. But I think ultimately at the end of the day, we always feel like we're really having a fun time, and it feels like such a it's I feel very lucky and grateful to be able to be in this position because Tony and Rachel are great. Everyone we work with is great. And even though we're working really hard, when it's all over, it still feels like it was just maybe one of the most, every time it feels like it was the best experience ever.
Yeah, I imagine you get back home and you probably want to go back, right? Just you kind of have some of those emotions.
It is. It's addictive to
I
be out there.
vacation,
Yeah.
even though it was so much work.
Yeah.
Getting back, I just hung out with all my friends. It was great.
Why don't we check in with the audience, Jeff, if we've got any audience questions?
Sure. Sort of following on from everybody kind of talking about their favorite country or episode, did you have different levels of challenges or different kinds of challenges from country to country?
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, every place you go, it's sort of you prepare for one location and you feel like you've got all the variables figured out and you're ready to go to the next location and meaning country, next country, and you show up and you realize that you have to start from scratch. It's a completely different playbook. Every place has different rules about how to shoot. Every place has different, sort of best practices. Every language is slightly, even though we're in Latin America, there's colloquial differences between the Spanish that's spoken, and then of course you go to Brazil where they speak Portuguese, and I think, every place presents its own unique challenges and opportunities to problem solve.
Even down to personnel, wanting to get into the wildlife industry, I was like, oh, you have to do everything yourself. You have to know every language. You have to know how to do all this carnet and paperwork. And then working on the show made me realize that like Evan Sutherland was our field producer. Is that right?
Yeah.
And he spoke Portuguese and Spanish, and it was like like insane asset to having him on there because he was able to mitigate a bunch of stuff. He was able to translate constantly. A lot of times when our translator was busy doing something else, he was extremely helpful. And then you always get a fixer as well in every country. So you realize that it is a lot grander than just you don't have to do it all yourself, and you shouldn't. So building the right team and getting the right people is really important.
I would
And
say
just
Evan. Oh, go ahead, Rachel. Sorry.
just identifying the dynamics of the locals when you first get there. Just like maybe there's one that's more interested in camera, a PA that you can just kind of claim. And I would just really rely heavily on some certain PAs, and they would carry the heavy backpack for me, and just like see who you can go to for things when it's crazy.
Yeah, there definitely is a feeling out for who steps up on those first 2 days, and then realizing that they're anticipating just like an assistant would, and you're like, oh, okay, this is the person I need to start relying on to, they stay close to you, they know the gear at least a little bit, or if they don't, then they're trying to understand it. And I know Rachel's really good at picking those people out pretty quickly, and she's a great delegator too. So a lot better.
Rely heavily on those people. So
yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Sounds like you definitely have to. That's amazing. So one thing I noticed about all of you is, also in the type of work you've done or type of work you want to do, it seems like everyone really enjoys the travel type of jobs. I know Tony specifically mentioned wildlife, and Rachel, you're working on a travel job. If any of you would want to kind of chime in about what is it about, travel type of production that you enjoy the most.
Guys?
Someone else first? Rachel?
I love travel work because I just always wanted to travel for work and use it as an excuse to do both. Since I love to travel, I might as well get paid to do it. And just the feeling of on these travel jobs, you get really close with the crew, like we've talked about, and if you get along, it's like going on vacation. And just feeling like you're part of this team that has to work and live with each other, and just can really rely on each other. And you also are in these really cool locations you probably wouldn't get to see just going on vacation, to meet all these and work with them. And that's my favorite part.
Absolutely. Tony, how about?
I think mine came just instinctually because when my parents split when I was young, I would drive from one or be driven from one house to another, and so I think something in me really enjoys change, and I feel more creative. I feel more kind of alive to be in somewhere where I'm uncomfortable. And my mom was a German Russian teacher, so hearing different dialects, then it doesn't, I don't know, it intrigues me, and it interests me to see how different people live. And a lot of times I've gained a lot about how I want to live through watching other cultures, because I feel like America, we tend to get kind of or pigeonhole ourselves, I guess, into our own culture. And by traveling, I feel like I've noticed a lot of different personalities. Like maybe Philippines, we came from India, where it was honking constantly. That was their way of communicating on the road.
Oh yeah, like communication by echolocation.
Yeah, it was extremely stressful to be inundated with like so much noise and so much chaos always. And then we went to Cebu in Philippines, and it was like island life. People people would cut each other off 10 times on the road, and there was no honking, there was no animosity, and it was like, this is just chill. It's okay. Like living in LA, it tends to, it starts to eat up at you, and it was nice to have these different cultures to realize, like, oh, dancing is really important, or smiling is really important, or this lifestyle of food, or going to get your own food, not just driving somewhere to get it. All these things I really value.
For me, I love the travel jobs, partly because I've come to really understand how traveling and seeing the rest of the world really opens your mind up to sort of just how big, but also how small the world actually is. For me, it's such a really privileged position to be in, where you can go on a company's dime and meet these people that you would not normally meet if you were a tourist, and sort of get access to a world that you wouldn't really have access to if you were just visiting that country. It's a really unique way to see the world, with very unique access that I don't think a lot of people get. And that's both very mind expanding and also very addictive. And I would say, you know, I think, yeah, I just feel extraordinarily lucky that I've found myself in this position where I've been able to travel so much and see so much of the world.
Yeah, absolutely. Check in with our audience. I know we've got another couple questions here.
Sure. Yeah. Sort of related to the last little bit of discussion. How extensive was the permitting? I imagine it did vary from country to country, but like if you're just shooting doc style B-roll in like an open market, did you ever encounter, you know, any friction with either, you know, law enforcement or just locals who weren't affiliated with the production?
Generally speaking, from my experience, no. Our fixers do a great job of making sure that everything is sort of above board ahead of time. I think if we're in a situation where we don't explicitly have a permit to be filming there, there are sort of these blanket permits that we also have. I don't recall having run into a situation where we've run into any kind of any sort of like law enforcement or any issue where we shouldn't be filming. If that does come up, it's usually handled by our fixer almost instantly. We're kind of kept away from that sort of thing.
That's great.
Yeah, it's generally speaking, it's all really above board.
That's amazing. So now let me bring us a little bit more present. You know, all of it, we're talking about how much you enjoy traveling and these different projects, and then, you know, flash forward to this year, and obviously things have been a little bit different. A lot of us have been staying at home or quarantined. What are the types of things that I know some of you have already started working on some safe, you know, productions? Can Rachel and everybody chime in on, you know, what type of productions you're working on now and what does that look like?
Yeah, I'm working on a travel show right now, amazingly enough. It's all domestic. We get tested for COVID every 2 weeks and wear a mask all day long, and it's just the new reality. And that started in July, so it's been going on for a while. Yeah, I can't say much more about the show, though.
Sure. Yeah, well, I think it's amazing that you're still able to obviously work right now, still able to travel, you know, and then you just, you know, adapting to the situation. That's amazing.
Yeah, I feel really lucky to have this job right now. A lot of productions are not coming back right now.
Right. Yeah, Alex, how about you? I think you were mentioning something that you're just starting to work on. What does that look like in terms of how it's being approached?
Well, so I'm doing a shoot this Thursday and Friday, and you know, it's interesting. It's all of the same stress of preparing for a shoot with also trying to time out COVID tests. I appreciate how hard everyone is working to make sure that we're safe and that people are following, you know, protocols and doing our best to, yeah, keep everyone safe. The thing that is a little tough is you start to run into limitations on how many people can all work in one space. So, you know, where before maybe you were used to having a crew of 10 or 15, well, now you can really only have like 5 people and everyone has to stay 6 feet apart. So I think the thing that's been most stressful about it is trying to figure out how to adapt what you would normally do to fit the times we're in now.
Right. Absolutely. What about things, you know, that you've been doing to stay, you know, inspired or creative while staying at home? You know, any types of things that you're really enjoying or that you haven't, especially since all of you often travel, you know, now you're at home a little bit more. What are the types of things that you're enjoying or doing, you know, to stay creative and stay sane?
Go for it, Rachel.
I've been reading a lot. Been taking a lot of film photos. Just got a roll back that I'm going to scan. It's going to take a chunk of my time, which is always fun. Yeah, I've just been reading a ton and going on walks and listening to a lot of podcasts. That's my day-to-day.
That's great.
I've been keeping schedule. I have a 4x5 large format camera and a garden out front of my building. And so I have been doing a lot of like really large format macro photography of the flowers in the garden. And, you know, just trying to keep up with, you know, different jobs and different things out there. And I've been taking a Spanish class. That's been great. So.
Oh, amazing. That's a great idea.
Tony, what have you been doing?
You're back. Yeah, we were. What's everyone been doing to stay sane or creative, during this time?
I actually, has everyone gone?
Yeah.
Okay. I don't get the opportunity to go home to Ohio very often to see family. That's where all my family's at. So I didn't trust the airlines because some of them, particularly the ones I have allegiance to, are not doing so great. So so I drove. I have a dog, so I drove from LA to Ohio. Did a canoe trip in the Boundary Waters in Minnesota, and then stayed for like a month and a half with family back in Ohio, and then traveled back across and went up to the Pacific Northwest and stuff. Place I don't get to see very often in our own country because we're working so much.
Yeah, that's amazing. I think it's such an interesting time because it's like things that you can take from it, that you want to remember for the future, and then obviously, we all also want to get back to work. So kind of balancing both of those things.
Yeah.
What about, we're getting towards the end here. I think it's always helpful, and all of you have such different experiences, different backgrounds, and also different, aspirations. What are some pieces of advice that you would want, that maybe you felt like you wish you would have known when you were starting out, or things you could, part our audience with if they're either starting out as an assistant or maybe they're trying to make the jump, to DP? What are those kinds of things that you would want to leave them with?
You guys go first.
Okay. I was gonna say, I got in actually in New Orleans I was really, really shy and timid, and so I had a roommate or a next door neighbor that was way more active and social, I guess. And she encouraged me to go down to the hot tub at our apartment complex one time. She was like, "Oh, there's this guy who says he works on National Geographic shows." And I was like, "No, he doesn't. He just wants to enjoy his night. Like, I don't want to mess with, like, I don't want to." Yeah, he's just trying to relax. And she was like, "No, come down, come down." Finally went down, and by meeting him, he brought me onto just a really small show. I met a second AC on that. She then brought me onto Django Unchained for the camera camera PA. And then from there, I met other people that then, it just skyrocketed from there. So literally never say no to an opportunity because you don't know who you're going to meet and where it's going to lead. Obviously, with those opportunities, you have to utilize them well and know your stuff and keep a positive attitude and be someone that someone wants to actually work with for 14 hours a day. So a lot of times I know that people have even said like, oh, I'd rather someone that doesn't know the gear and know the job quite as well, but is a really fun person to hang out with because you really are you're building a family because you have to spend so much time with them.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what you said about opportunities is great, like being open to them, but then also, taking them seriously and using them as a way to meet more people. And, you never know what the next job's going to be or the next person. And they all, things seem to always circle back. I'm sure you've experienced that.
Yeah. And appreciate them too, because I know a lot of times humbleness is lost with time. So
yeah, good point. Rachel, how about you?
Yeah, what Tony said, and also it's easier said than done, but just keep putting yourself out there. And I was also very shy and not assertive, but I got two of my biggest breaks, I guess you'd call it, by just walking up to somebody on set. I wasn't even in the camera department, and I was just like, I want your job, and how do I get there? And I just talking to them, and that led to one thing, and then another time, the same thing, where I just walked into a prep room and was just like, I want to work on this movie, and it was terrifying, and it worked out. So people respond to that if you keep telling them what you want to do and where you want to go, and just as scary as it can be, just keep putting yourself out there.
Absolutely, that's good advice.
And to jump off of what they said, for me, I always think about the fact that Emily Goodwin gave me essentially my first job after one day of meeting me and after I had called her 2 months later without ever having talked to her between those 2 points. You know, what Rachel and Tony said about putting yourself out there, it's key, and it's like the most uncomfortable thing to do sometimes, but it really pays off. And, you know, careers have this sort of pendulum effect where you take a couple steps forward, you fall back a little bit, you have like a really good day, you have a really bad day. And I would say to anybody who's out there really trying to make transitions or really trying to move up or even just trying to get your foot in the door, just remember that as long as you have a reasonably concrete idea of where it is you want to go, you'll get there. It just takes time. And don't try to rush it, and don't try to go too slow. Just find your pace and you'll get there.
That's really great. I love the pendulum analogy. That's great. Well, thank you everyone for joining us from our audience, as well as Alex, Tony, and Rachel. You guys are really, really amazing team to hear from and learn from, and can't wait to see more of all of your work.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you so
for
much.
leading this.
Absolutely. Everyone
Street
listening.
Food Latin America, Netflix.
I was just gonna say, make sure you check it out. Also watch the first season if you haven't checked that out yet. Both really amazing pieces all around. So thanks everyone for watching. Again, thank you to my guests for joining us, and we will catch you next time. Thanks everybody.
Thank you so much for everything.
Thank you.
Have a
Yeah,
great
thank
day.
you.
Bye everybody.